Well, you think they're on edge south of the border about next Tuesday night. They're pretty anxious about the same thing in Ottawa, too, for all kinds of reasons. Why? Well, let's find out. Chantel's under the weather this week, but Andrew and Robert Fife are here in studio, and Rosie Barton joins us from Ottawa tonight. Bob, you were in Ottawa all week. What were you hearing? Are they really edgy about this?
It's one of fear, to be honest. Whether it's from the Prime Minister down to cabinet ministers, the Supreme Court justice, deputy ministers, even common security guards are talking about it. And there's three particular concerns that they have. One is if Trump wins, the immediate impact on the global economy. You're going to have a market downfall, pretty significant, I think. The finance minister has already talked to G20 leaders about how do you deal with this? How do you reassure the markets? Second of all is global security, which is a big concern because Trump doesn't care about NATO and NORAD, for example. And the concern is what happens to our Eastern European allies? Do they then get edge up to Russia now? Does Japan and South Korea, for example, say maybe we have to do an atomic weapon because we have concerns? And then the third thing is the immediate impact on Canada, which obviously is very significant of concern for the government, and because he wants to rip off NAFTA, and he wants to impose a 35% tariff on cars and car imports in Canada and Mexico. Just think of the impact on the Canadian economy of that happening. So those are real serious concerns.
No kidding, a real hat trick of them. What are you hearing, Rosie?
Yeah, I mean, it is the topic of conversation. It's how I start and end interviews with anyone these days. And there is certainly a lot of anxiety around the idea of a President Trump for all the reasons that Bob put forward. But there is some reassurance maybe that good sense will prevail no matter who wins, that people around Trump, were he to win, will tell him why Canada matters, that state senators will remind him that they rely heavily on the Canadian economy, that we're their best customer. So, that is still the hope. And there are, I would say, not fears around a President Clinton, but there are some questions as well. She has said one thing around TPP and then changed her mind on that. This government isn't really sure how it's going to proceed with the Trans-Pacific trade deal, but they would sure like some clear signals from the new administration on what they plan to do. So, the level of anxiety obviously not the same with the idea of President Clinton, but there are questions about how she will be forced to govern and administer if she becomes president, especially given the drag to the left, right, by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and others. So I think there's, real concern on one side and then just some niggling questions on the other.
Andrew, you've never had to wait so long to get your bid in, but I'm going to get you to give it after we hear from Prime Minister Trudeau, because it's one thing about what they're saying in the hallways to Bob and to Rosie and to others. It's quite another what they're saying in front of the cameras. And here's what Justin Trudeau had to say today.
I'm not going to get into answering hypotheticals about what could happen if, what could happen that. I'm going to have faith in the American political process and reassure Canadians that I will work with whomever gets elected to continue to defend Canada's interests and grow our economy.
And just to be clear, the question he was answering at that point was he worried about insurrection in the streets in the U.S. after a result that could provoke the other side to be very upset? What is your take on all this?
Well, that is a concern to begin with. We've never seen anything like this candidacy or this campaign. I'm more concerned, I suppose, less by the policies, as troubling as so many of his policies are, where he's deigned to announce them, but he's been on every side of every issue, that it's difficult to say for sure what his policies would be. And secondly, he'd have to work with the Congress, whatever stripe that was, and that would put some constraints policy-wise on him. I think what's much more concerning is his character, judgment, lack of knowledge, etc. You've just never seen anybody so manifestly unfit and unqualified for the job. It's an extraordinary indictment of the American political process that it's gotten this far. But you could literally take 10 people off the street, and 9 of them would be better qualified to be president than Donald Trump. He's almost the composite of everything you would not want in a candidate or a president. And for any world leader, Canadian or anybody else, having to deal with such an unknowable, untested, unpredictable force of nature, as it will, is going to be greatly worrying.
One thing
Can
is
I
that-
just
Yeah,
interject
go
on this?
ahead.
Because this guy is so erratic, and that's the concern of everybody, is that nobody can control him. Oh, you can say, oh, the congressional leaders, well, he's at war with the congressional leaders. If he's going to have a cabinet ministers, well, we know he doesn't listen to his own advisors. You know, the only chance, actually, we may even have some input with Donald Trump if they go to Conrad Black, because Conrad Black is a good friend of his and has been a big fan of his and be promoting him. Maybe we'll end up, if he does win, you'll have the Prime Minister having to call up Conrad Black.
Rosie, you wanted in on
Well,
that?
I was just going to say, and Conrad Black might ask President Trump for a pardon. I would guess that would be the first part of their conversation.
Well,
But anyway.
you know, given some of the columns Conrad has written in the last month or two, he might actually get one.
Yeah.
Let me stay on this issue of the bigger threat to Canada specific. I hear what you're saying, Bob, in terms of NATO and the United Nations, NORAD, what have you, and the concerns that are being expressed globally on the economic side. But specifically to Canada, is it this trade issue, almost no matter which side wins, whether it's Clinton or Trump? Andrew?
With Clinton, now you have much more of the sense of, we've seen this movie before where candidates run against trade while they're running, and then most of them wind up accommodating themselves.
Even Obama did.
Obama did, Brian Mulroney did, Jean Chrétien did, and you get the vibe from her, particularly given her past track record, that that's more or less what's going on here. Now, like, again, it will depend upon the shape of the Congress that she's faced with, but any president has to be able to work on both sides of the aisle, to get support on both sides of the aisle. And while she would be an unlikely candidate in most circumstances, given the history of animosity, on those types of issues, she might find a lifeline, if you will, from conservative Republicans who are trying to distance themselves from the protectionist reputation of Trump.
Rosie?
Well, I've talked to lots of former ambassadors and prime ministers about this issue in the past couple of weeks, and they all think that it's something that everyone can get past, that, as Andrew says, this is something that sort of happens in American elections. I think the bigger issue, though, for Americans and that Canadians need to watch is, what do Americans do in the days that follow to deal with the fact that there are people in the United States and around the world who feel that they've been left behind by globalization and by big trade agreements. This government, as you know, is talking more and more about that, and actually appealing to other countries to start talking about it, start talking concretely about how trade deals help the middle class, help people that need help most. And the reason that we're seeing some of what we're seeing in the United States is because no one has really ever explained that very well. And some people feel very detached and disillusioned because they feel they've been left behind by some of those things. So if the United States doesn't address those sort of root issues, I think that that's a bigger problem for Canada, particularly given that this government is trying to push that narrative forward.
Although we shouldn't exaggerate how much of that is what's driving Trump's support, for one thing.
No.
There's a whole range of different things. A lot of it,
Sure.
I think, is just, as somebody put it, a brick through the window at the establishment for any number of different reasons. But also, some of that trade, and Rosie raises an absolutely legitimate issue of people feeling like they're losing their sovereignty and these kinds of issues. Those absolutely have to be addressed. But when you look at Trump's rhetoric, so much of it is addressed at Mexico and China. I suspect Canada is not the top of the list of people that people want to bash.
But the problem we have is that he wants to rip up the North American Free Trade Agreement, and we're part of that.
Yeah.
And if you think about this, just on, we're the fourth largest foreign direct U.S. investment in this country. And we have all these American subsidiaries in this country that employ 1.2 million people. You start putting up the kind of protectionist measures that Donald Trump is talking about by ripping off NAFTA, you're talking about potentially very serious job losses and very serious impact on the economy. With Hillary Clinton, you're getting, I think Andrew was quite right, she's going to be more protectionist because she has to be politically. But we're used to that. We can live with that kind of stuff. What we can't live with is a man who doesn't understand the global economy, the Canadian economy, the North American economy. Let him loose.
You know, if we were having this conversation a week ago tonight, we would have been talking probably about the possibility of a sweep across the U.S. by the Democrats, by Hillary Clinton for the presidency. Everything changed the next day, Friday, a week ago tomorrow, when James Comey, the FBI director, announced that they were going to start looking once again at the email situation. He's been criticized by Democrats and by others for kind of entering the fray, which reminded me of this clip. This interview that I did with a certain person A year after the Liberals lost to the Conservatives in 2006. The interview was actually early 2008. Watch this. One of the most politically astute commissioners of the RCMP. You know the game in Ottawa. We're in the middle of an election campaign. And the RCMP announces a criminal investigation into a matter that potentially involves a number of people, including the Minister of Finance, who you name in the press release, in the middle of an election campaign. Surely there was no doubt in your mind the impact that would have politically.
There was no political consideration given at all to this. Of course, I'm aware of the context and the facts that are going on, but I have a duty to perform. I'm sworn to perform that duty. Had that case happened 6 months later or 6 months before, I would have done exactly the same thing, because anything otherwise would have played exactly into the hands of those who say, well, he's being political. My job was to do my job and perform my duty. The consequences are not my responsibility.
Sound familiar? We haven't heard from Comey in an interview, but we've seen statements, and they almost are word for word like that.
To be honest, I have some sympathy for both men, and they were put in very difficult positions for slightly different reasons. In Zaccardelli's case, he was asked directly what was the status of the investigation. And I think there's some justice in the argument that if he'd said no comment, he would have caused a similar ruckus. If he'd lied, that wouldn't have been a very good practice either. In Comey's case, he's got what appears to be something of an insurrection going on inside the FBI, whether it's because they simply wish Hillary Clinton ill, or whether they feel that the Justice Department has been leaning on the FBI to go slow on these investigations, particularly around the Clinton Foundation. But for one reason or another, I think he had to be conscious of, if I don't say it, it's going to get leaked out anyway. So I'm not saying either man handled it as well as they might have. They're in the political game, whether they wish to be or not. But I also have some sympathy for the difficulty of the position they were in. Bob?
Well, actually, Zaccardelli was completely wrong on this. The RCMP does not typically announce whether they're doing criminal investigations or not, and they do not say who is under investigation.
Same with the FBI.
And the same with the FBI, and whether you're talking to Democratic attorney generals or Republican attorney generals, all have come out and said that what Comey did was completely wrong, the same thing as Zaccardelli, especially during election campaigns. There's no doubt about that. RCMP news release killed the Liberals' chances of electoral victory.
The only difference, I would say, between these two cases, although they're similar, is that Comey had concluded an investigation that everyone knew about, had decided not to lay criminal charges, and had moved on. So what was he going to do when they found out that there were other avenues they wanted to explore that, yes, oh my gosh, happened to be related to Anthony Weiner? Was he not going to explore them? Was he not going to release that information? I agree with Andrew. There was a pretty good chance that was going to get out there anyway. And then it was going to look like he was trying to cover it up or help Hillary Clinton. It was really one of those situations where he was damned if he did, damned if he didn't. And I think that's the difference between him here and Zaccardelli back in 2006, where Bob's right. The RCMP never tell you that they've started an investigation, and they certainly never name the person. So that was really unheard of.
I only got 30 seconds left. We've been watching this scandal unfold in Quebec on journalists. And Bob, there have been few people who have broken more stories than you, if there's anybody who's broken more stories than you over the last, God, how long have we known each other? A long time, out of Ottawa. Have you ever felt you were being watched or followed or listened to?
Look, I've been under investigation by the RCMP and from the military police, where they've come and tried to interview me about stories I've done. My biggest concern was always that they were going to come and search my office, and occasionally they've done that. But I've never, ever felt that a judge would give a warrant to allow them to tap my phones or follow me around like they've been doing to the Quebec journalists. I never, ever thought that would happen in this country, that a judge would allow this, because freedom of the press is so essential, particularly in the age of the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So it's quite shocking.
It is something for all of us to be concerned about. Rosie, thanks for joining us on short notice, filling in for Chantal. And Bob, great to have you with us. Andrew, as always. And a reminder about our coverage next Tuesday night. We're all over the election night story on CBC News Network all day and all night, and from 9 p.m. Eastern right through until the story's over on CBC Television.